Hi, everybody. My name's Joel Mendez. I'm our executive director at the Prepared Montessori Institute, and I'm thrilled to be talking with Fiona Sosa today. Welcome, Fiona. Happy to have you chat with me for a bit.
Hi, Joel. Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Of course, Fiona is one of the speakers that's going to be joining us at the Discovering the Child conference this weekend. If you haven't signed up yet, do it. It's going to be a online event that's taking place over the course of 24 hours this weekend with speakers from all around the world joining us. And Fiona's one of them. Fiona's coming to us as a parent and as a parent who's found Montessori education somewhat recently. And I'd like to learn a little bit more about your approach with your children and just hear about your story. So we'll just have a casual chat right now. If you want to hear more about Fiona, there's a couple ways, just really quick. She's all over Instagram. She's at Montessori Fingers on Instagram, so you can follow her there. And like I said, she'll be speaking at our conference this weekend, Saturday at 12:45 Eastern Time, sharing her story with a few other parents who make it work. So Fiona, just really quick, without giving too much away, I'd love to hear a little bit of your backstory. How did you find Montessori education, and what was it about it that was compelling?
My son was in a Montessori preschool classroom when lockdown happened last year, and his school actually just shut down for 8 months. And I wanted to continue Montessori learning at home, and so he actually really led us to Montessori, and kind of like just one thing happened after the other. As I discovered Montessori, I actually learned that there is room for Montessori for everyone, even if your kids are in a traditional school, whether your kids don't go to a Montessori school, everyone can implement Montessori.
And so if we just get this picture right, your son was going to a Montessori school, and then the world stopped with COVID happening, and then all of a sudden you found yourself with your children at home. And I know that you're full time working, and were you full time working that whole time? And just how did that work? How did you balance your time?
So I think I am, fortunate enough to work where I work now, because I don't want to glamorize working from home and with two kids at home. But I'm also very fortunate that I have a lot of flexibility to manage my own time. But I think it's important to note that, this is COVID. We are living in unprecedented times, and it's important to take this time to slow down and give yourself a lot of grace. So there is so much to Montessori if you want to
Mhm.
get into it. And in my talk, I want to share with you how I discovered Montessori, the resources that helped me implement Montessori both as a way of life and as an educational approach, and the resources that helped me really get me to a place where I am right now.
Mm, yeah. And what an adventure to sort of all of a sudden be your children's teacher. So I'm curious, as you dove in a little bit more to the Montessori approach, how did you go about it? Did you go out and buy everything? Did you read all the books? Like what was your approach to becoming a teacher for your children? Um,
I think that for me, like many of you who are just starting your journey to Montessori, I searched Google, read so many Montessori blogs, and at the end of the day, all the information was extremely overwhelming. So
mm,
um, there's I read books. You know, I had a coach, and I think the biggest struggle with implementing Montessori as an educational approach is how to present the materials and what is the scope and sequence to follow with presenting these materials. So there is so much to Montessori.
so how did you just get started then? I guess maybe I'll ask it this way. What was the part of the Montessori approach that you discovered and thought, "Yep, this is how I want my child to learn"?
You know, when my son was 2 years and 10 months, he went home and he had these landforms, and then he was like, "This is archipelago. This is peninsula. This is." I was like, my husband and I were so surprised at such a young age.
Mm-hmm.
They are already exposed to these things. And I'm like, I wanted him to be able to continue that Montessori learning at home. So, in terms of really how to present it, I read Montessori albums and it teaches you how to present the Montessori materials. And so it's really a lot of educating myself. I did
Mm-hmm.
invest in kind of really, I invested time to educate myself to get to a place here. But it does get better with
Mm-hmm.
anything. The first few months is always challenging, but once you get there, you just keep moving forward.
Mm. And what kept you going during that challenging time?
In terms of,
Why did you persist? I mean, it was so hard. Every parent out there was like trying to figure out how to work with their kids, how to have meetings and not be interrupted. You could have just turned on the TV and been like, I'm taking a break for a little bit from that because I have to focus on something else." And it's a little overwhelming. There's a lot to read. There's so many Montessori educators willing to give you all the advice in the world. Like, how did you keep going through all that?
my kids are, when I learned about Montessori, I wanted as an educational approach. I just fell in love with it. I think the whole pedagogy is just, and I really wish, and a lot of parents who actually learned Montessori so much later in their life, they always say this: I wish I had learned Montessori. I wish I had learned the Montessori way, and especially math. So I think just the way that the like the educational approach to Montessori, it fosters a love for learning. And so I think that really kept me going. Like, I want my kids to love learning. I don't want them to just learn, but I actually want them to love to learn. And
Mm,
Montessori's educational approach does that. And I don't think there is another approach. I'm kind of biased because I've done so much reading on Montessori that
sure.
does that.
Look, I'm biased too. You got me sold. I'm trained to do this whole kind of thing over here. Um, so interesting. And then you went from being a working mother, making the best decisions to send your children to the schools that you thought would be best for them, to being a working mother who's now teaching your children and incorporating the Montessori approach in your home. And then you felt compelled to tell your story. Tell me about how you started going out on social media. What's your goal, and what do you like about that side of your day, of your work?
No, thanks, Joel, for asking this. I think initially when I started my Instagram account, I wanted it to be a visual record of our kind of homeschooling distance learning journey at home. Obviously, homeschooling and distance learning are two different things. But
Sure.
and then, like, as I learned more about Montessori, I'm just really, I want to advocate for Montessori as an educational approach and as a philosophy, because especially because I come from the Philippines, and coming from like, I live in Canada now, and I find that there are not a lot of families who actually school following Montessori principles, even homeschooling, right? And so,
Mm,
even if your kids go to a traditional school, I wanted to say that, you can focus on one area of Montessori, whether that's math or language, and bring it into your own home. Montessori
mm,
is not one all or nothing.
mhm,
And so I didn't know that as a
mm,
student whose son was in a Montessori school, I wasn't aware of that. I only came to know about these things as I delved more into Montessori. I'm like, oh, okay. Even if my daughter is actually in a Montessori school, I mean, even if my daughter is in a traditional school, I think there's
Mm-hmm.
ways that she can adopt Montessori. So I wanted to just advocate for Montessori and to let everyone know that, you know, everyone can do this, and it doesn't matter whether you work or you're a full-time stay-at-home mom. There's so many ways that we can adopt Montessori and bring Montessori into our own homes.
Well, thank you so much for that contribution. I do feel like there are so many potential barriers that you can point at. Oh, I would incorporate Montessori, but it's too expensive, or but I know they're going to go to a traditional school, or but I don't have the time. And all of those things are true. Like there are, if you went all the way in, you can dive down the rabbit hole. I mean, there's people who make careers out of becoming Montessori educators. But that's not the only way to get started. And I completely agree. There are some principles about the Montessori approach that you can adopt. You can respect your children and create these learning experiences for them inspired by the Montessori approach, and set them up to be a little bit more independent and find that joy in learning like you're talking about. So I appreciate the fact that you're helping other people discover Montessori education and in an accessible way. If you don't follow Fiona yet, you should, because she's got all sorts of great things on at Montessori Fingers on Instagram. Um, Thanks for taking the time too. We'll get a chance to learn a lot more about you this Saturday. Again, 12:45 p.m. Eastern time. And thanks for doing it. Thanks for chatting with me today.
Thanks, Joel. And if you haven't bought your ticket yet, please join me and some other Montessorians as well who are working like me. And we are going to share with you how we implement Montessori at home as working parents. And I hope that I can inspire you to bring Montessori into your own homes, either however you want to implement it.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll see you Saturday.
Thanks. See ya.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.